Sports, 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 sports. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another Coffee Games episode. It's Coffee Games. Wow, we're back with a usual one. Last week was a little bit unusual, but here we are. We're talking about video games. The unloved genre of video games, sports games. Oh no! I want to talk a little bit about stories within sports games a little bit here. You see the title of this video, you clicked on it, you know what you're getting into. So I want to talk a little bit about that. But before we get started, are you doing okay? How are you doing? How is your cat? Is your cat doing good? I'm glad. Welcome to the Games and Groceries channel. If you're new here, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button and a notification bell. If you enjoy discussions on video games, we have these kinds of videos every Thursday morning, as well as a weekly podcast, the Games and Groceries podcast, coming out every Monday morning. So if you're into that, definitely click that subscribe button. And if you get to the end of this video and you enjoyed it, definitely give it a like and a share. But with all that said and done, let's just get right into the discussion. I think that stories in sports games are a little bit underwhelming at times, and I think they're not utilized in the right way. And more so, I think it can deviate away from what sports games should be doing. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Now, I do have a bit of a bias when it comes to stories. I do enjoy a good narrative-driven game, a good story-driven game. You know, I like my short stories too. I love Oxenfree. I love Firewatch, and I like my longer stories like Assassin's Creed games. You know, it is what it is. So I do have a bias there, but I also love sports games. I absolutely love them. So with all that said, I think it's just time to jump into my first point, and I kind of want to make an argument for stories in sports games. So again, I enjoy a good story in games, but even more so, I like a good sports story, a good triumphant sports triumphant story. I don't know. Of course, I'm being from Philadelphia, so of course I love Rocky, that sort of sports story, but I also love the first movie that came into my head was Invincible, which also took place in Philadelphia. I'm very biased, I'm sorry, but I like a good sports story where you rise up from the ranks and you have a journey in your path, and you have accomplishments, you have trophies to win. I love that sort of story, and sports stories have that sort of way to them, especially in sports games. But my very favorite sports game story came from FIFA 17 through 19, which was The Journey. The Journey was a trilogy following Alex Hunter as he had a journey into his football career. Unless you live in America and it's soccer. But he had this journey, this path, and it followed 3 different characters at one point, where you followed his old teammate Danny Williams, his sister Kim Hunter, and it's this weird transition of I was just this kid playing soccer going to now Real Madrid. And it's just this great trilogy of games. And what I love most about what EA did is that now you can buy the trilogy separately. You don't have to buy FIFA 17, 18, 19. You can buy The Journey on its own. And I think they did this because The Journey was such a great story. It's such a great story-driven game in general. And I think that's what they did right. A good continuous story and an actually well-written path, and actually interviewing different people in the league to get their experiences of their journey in a soccer league or a football league, whatever you want to call it. And I even more so, the long shot on Madden 18, I think. Madden 18 did it great, right? It was just a 2-hour short movie. I think they did a spectacular job on Longshot, just being a 2-hour film pretty much. And I think that a good sports story needs good writers. And I think once they have a good writer, you have this great mode in a sports game that you bought for $60 every year, by the way. But you at least have this mode where you are the player. You are building this journey. You are on this path to become a pro, a prodigy, a legend. And I think it really puts you into that focus, saying that not only am I playing a sports game, but I have this path before me that I can be a legend someday. I think NBA 2K did as in past tense, they did this well, but I love 2K17's story. One, because Michael B. Jordan was in it. That was fantastic. My point in all of this is saying is that when you have a well-written story, it puts you into that place. And I think that's when it does it right. When you do it right, you can really feel the pressures. You can really feel the tension. You can really put yourself in the mindset of an actual player when you yourself don't play any sports at all. Oops. But that's what I mean. I think there's a good argument to put stories in sports games. They don't have to be just multiplayer or just competing against your friends. I think you can have a good story mode in a game and be worthwhile. If you haven't yet, definitely check out The Journey. You can buy it separately. I think it's worth the play. And if you have Xbox Game Pass, well, guess what? You have access to EA Play now. You have all 3 of those games. So check them out for yourself. Enough of me rambling on this point. I do want to make the other argument though. Now, I love these stories. I think they're fantastic, but there's a caveat. There's a caveat here. Why is it a bad thing to put stories in sports games? I do want to make that argument as well. It's not just a great tale to tell, but there's also takeaways here. There's trade-offs. So as the saying goes, when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to another. There's always trade-offs in life. And that's very true, that if you say yes to one thing, you will say no to another thing. If you say yes to your job all the time, you're saying no to your friends, your family, your wife. But you're saying a trade-off here. Now, when I say wasted resources, I mean just that. Every game needs to have resources, and when you put out a game every single year, you need to use your resources correctly. You need to utilize them in the right way. And I brought up FIFA, especially FIFA 17, 18, 19, where they utilized the journey, and I think they did a fantastic job with that. I absolutely loved every part of the journey. However, the biggest problem with FIFA games is that they feel very copy and paste, extremely copy and paste, the same mechanics over and over again. There are some cutscenes within playing FIFA, just the journey, and it's the same thing over and over again. And where they put focus on the journey, it's wasted resources when they can focus on the main reason why you buy a sports game, to play the sport. It's as simply as that. So when you're focusing on making a well-written journey, you're using those resources that could be put into building mechanics in the game. So when you're not really utilizing the best way to make your resources, your game falls down on what it should be doing. And I think if I were to choose something, if I were to choose a really well-written story or a well-built sports game where it really feels like I'm playing the game in of itself, I would rather have better mechanics. To be quite honest with you, even though I love stories in sports games, I would rather choose a game to be utilized and have less latency. Definitely less latency in sports games. My goodness, I don't know why that's hard to do. Well, I do know why it's hard to do, is because they focus on different aspects of the game that don't actually matter in the first place. I think stories in sports games are a nice addition. It's a fantastic addition, but it takes away from some things. And I think NBA 2K really suffers from this because they bring on, really high paid actors. They had Idris Elba, I said before, Michael B. Jordan. In 2K16, it was written by Spike Lee. They bring on high asset writers, actors. So that's a lot of resources that could be paying more people when they're actually paying these highly addressed actors. They had Michael Rappaport on 2K19, I think it was. They had Michael Rappaport. My goodness. My point is that they're putting their time, their resources, their money into something that doesn't really matter in the long run. So it's a wasted resource. I will put that argument in. And I will say, I feel like if NBA 2K especially did not have a story mode, I think the game would be better. I think it would. I think that the NBA 2K story doesn't really matter. That money, that time that you put into recording these voice actors or animating this story could have been utilized instead of making a copy-paste game every single year. And that's just my arguments. Now FIFA is done with the Journey story. They're not making those anymore, but it still feels very copy-paste, and it's very unfortunate. But I think the argument goes is that when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to another. When you're saying yes to a really high-paid actor, you're saying no to low latency. That's a stupid trade-off, but it is what it is. So to end all this, just to wrap this up, I love story games. I said that before, but I also know it's a big problem in sports games. So what am I saying? What am I asking, sports developers to do? What should we just abandon stories altogether? Should we just focus on mechanics? Will Idris Elba ever come back to a sports game ever? I don't know. But my point is this. If you're going to do a story in a sports game, do it the right way. And especially going into next-gen systems, we have the technology to do this, but we don't need to do it every year. So let's go into my final points. If every single sports game has a story in it, none of them are going to be special. None of them will be impactful. If everybody's special, then nobody's special, as the saying goes. And I think that goes well into sports games. I think that because you have to put out... Okay, you don't have to put out a sports game every single year. Let's just do a live service game already. I'm tired of trying to pay $60 every single year. That's stupid. Live service people, whatever. But if you put a story in every single sports game, none of them will be impactful. The reason why I keep bringing up the Journey in FIFA 17 through 19 is because they did it the right way. It was a continuous trilogy. It was the same universe. You followed the story every single year, and it was impactful. There are times where it just got boring, I will say. I'm not saying it was the perfect sports story, but for what it was, they did it the right way. They had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and when they ended, they ended. Like, that was it. Did you enjoy it? I did. Even with the long shot I brought up before, it was a 2-hour story. That's it. You got your story. It was just basically a 2-hour tutorial for the game. I will argue that, but you know what? You had it. Here's a mode. You want to play it? Cool. Here you go. And they ended it with that. And I think if you're going to do a story in a sports game, you got to do it the right way. And what I mean is that we don't need high-paid actors in these sports games, okay? We don't need them. Get somebody who's just out of acting school or something like that. Get somebody who's not known and can be starting, his, her, whatever, their career with a sports game. Just have it at that. You don't need a high-paid actor. And, don't have a story in every game. Just have like a little special, but every now and again, like this one has a story. This year does not. It doesn't matter. And then my final point is that, like I said before, we're in next-gen consoles now. We have utilizations where there's no load times. The graphics, the fidelity of these new consoles are something we've never seen before. It's in the same line as PCs now. It's crazy to think about. But now we have the utilization to actually make a well-rounded story without taking up too many resources from the actual mechanics. You can have both, but there can't be trade-offs within the company. You can't just take away money to make a better story when the actual reason why you buy a sports game in the first place is to play the sport. You're just copy and pasting. Then what's the point of buying that sports game? Just for a short story? That's no way to do things. The reason why a lot of people buy sports games is just to compete against their friends, compete against people online. That needs to be the main focus. You don't need Michael B. Jordan. You don't need Idris Elba. You don't need high-paid actors. I think just wrapping up my thoughts here, as I'm just rambling at this point, is that when you do things the right way, that's when they become impactful. That's when they become something that you talk about with your friends. Like, have you played this mode? I know you have the game. You should really play this mode. Versus NBA 2K.
Oh, yeah, there's a story in it. It's
Yeah, yep, there's a story in it. I can only pick a handful of NBA 2K stories that are actually a good story. But what I'm saying is that do it the right way. Use your next gen console platforms as, a great way to make these games. Don't put a story in every single sports game and actually focus on the mechanics. Stop giving me crappy latency when I'm playing 2K just because you had to pay this high paid actor. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I like a good story, but just not in every one. Make them impactful, give them purpose, and just do it the right way. I don't need a story in every single sports game. Just give me ones that are impactful whenever you can. It doesn't matter. So I want to hear from you. Write your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think about sports games? What do you think about stories in sports games? What is your favorite story in a sports game? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Have you played The Journey? What did you think of it? Do you think more games need to utilize this? Write your thoughts in the comments down below. I want to hear from you. I still haven't played FIFA 20, so I want to get into the Volta League. So I'm going to go ahead and just go on Game Pass and download that now. So I will see you all later. Have a good one. Stay safe out there. And for the love of God, wear your mask! How you doing?